one more concept that we need to cover before coding out our blockchain data structure is we need to cover the prototype object. The prototype object is simply an object that multiple other objects can refer to get any information or functionality that they need. For our needs, each of our constructor functions will have a prototype that all their instances will be able to refer to. So let's clarify what this means by doing a couple of examples. If we take our user constructor function we previously made, we can put properties onto its prototype that all of our user instances, like user1 and user200, will have access to and be able to use. Let's put a property on our user prototype and see what happens. To put a property on the user prototype, we will type user.prototype and then the name of the property that we want to add. So, for instance, let's say email domain. Let's say that Facebook wants everybody to have an @facebook.com email address. So we will set the email domain property equal to @facebook.com. Now let's check out our user1 object again. We can see that it does not have the email domain property that we just added on it. But if we go deeper into the user1 object and look at its dunder proto, which is this object right here, we call it the dunder proto, we can see that the email domain property we just added is here, and it is set to @facebook.com. Now, just to clarify, the dunder proto and the prototype object that we actually put the email domain property on up here, they are not exactly the same thing, but they are very similar. Basically, anything that we put on the constructor function prototype, we will have access to on the dunder proto of any of the objects that we create with the constructor function. So if we put email domain on the constructor function's prototype, we will have access to it on user1's dunder proto, user200's dunder proto, and the dunder protos of any other user instance that we create. Okay, now back to this email domain property. So we put the email domain property on the user prototype, and we can see that we don't have the property on the actual user200 object here, but we have the property on the user200's dunder proto. So if we type out user200.emailDomain, we will still have access to that property, and we should see the string @facebook.com show up here. Great, it does. So that is how the prototype object works. If we put a property on the constructor function's prototype, all of the instances of the constructor function will have access to that property. The same thing goes for any methods or functions that we might want all of our instances to have. So, for example, if I want all of our user instances to have a getEmailaddress method, I can put it on the prototype of the constructor function, which is what I will do now. I will say user.prototype.getEmailaddress equals a function, and I will have this method return the first name, so this.firstname, plus the last name, so this.lastname, plus the email domain, so this.emailDomain, which we just put on the prototype. Now, both user1 and user200 should have this method on their dunder proto. So let's check it out. We'll write user1, go to the dunder proto, and yep, good, right there's get email address. And now if we type in user200 and press enter and go to the dunder proto, great, so both user1 and user200 have the get email address property, or method on their dunder proto. Okay. Now if I type user200 dot get email address and invoke it, Great, it creates for me user200's Facebook email address, just as we expected it to. And if I say user1 dot get email address and invoke it, it gives me back user1's Facebook email address, just as we expected it to. Okay, great. So that is how we use the prototype object with a constructor function. If we want our constructor function instances to all have a property that is the same for all of them, or all have a method that is the same for all of them, we will put it on the prototype instead of on the constructor function itself to keep the instances more lean and cleaner.
Cool. So that is all the background information that we need to know in order to start coding out our blockchain data structure. In the next video, we will start building out our blockchain by using a constructor function and the prototype object. I'll see you there.